So who is in the room? Why don't we start over here? Martha, I see you. Are you with this group normally? Please, who are you?
3 of us are from Blue Mountain, students at Blue Mountain, and then we have Martha Rich and Andrew.
All right, thank you very much. Does everybody know where Blue Mountain is?
Okay, so we're from Twinfield. This half of the table with our teacher Mary Whalen.
And we're from New York City, just me and Stacy right there. Say hi, Stacy. We're from New York.
Thanks.
Amber, I'm the only one in my group from Massachusetts.
Great, from Lowell.
Yeah.
Great, and how far did you travel to get here?
I think it was about 2.5 hours, 3 hours.
Great. Thank you very much.
Hi. So at that table, this half of the table is from Milton,
and the other half of the table is from Otter Valley, which is in Brandon.
More?
An hour and 27 minutes away.
Thank you.
But how do we get distance by time?
Hi, this whole table is from Williamstown. We brought 10 students and our dean of students, April Wortman, and we have 3 of them at the table right now.
Hi, I'm Audrey from Hazen. I'm here with Sally McCarthy, and from Hardwick, Vermont. It was probably like 30 or 40 minutes away.
Okay, so to get some background on data in a day, when I worked in Houston, Texas with a high school, the high school had been moving and shaking. It had done a lot of really good things. But still, if you went to the classrooms and you looked at teaching and learning, there were students that were falling asleep over by the windows, or there were certain groups of students that weren't coming to school, and so they weren't a part of the kind of data that people would access in the school. So they reached a point where they were making claims about themselves, and they would say this if they were here. They were wonderfully open. But they wanted to see, all right, how close really are we to our vision? So I had gone to a conference where I had talked about the motivational framework in these 4 R's, and at that conference was someone from Northwest Regional Educational Laboratory, which is a group of professionals that provide support to schools. And they had the structure for data in a day, but they didn't have any content for it. So we put our ideas together, and that's where this comes from. And so Springwoods High School, which was the school in Houston, Texas, that first experimented with this, with the motivational framework, was really courageous. They put together a planning team, and the planning team worked with the school to answer 5 questions that we're going to explore later on, beginning with they did this with teachers. What would need to happen with this process so that it was fundamentally respectful of all of us? And then the other really important question is, what are our purposes in doing this? You get to define your purposes and customize it to your location. There's a third one too, which I'll tell you, which is what kind of feedback do we want? Because in the beginning, we would keep everybody's name anonymous. We collected how the school as a whole was doing, not how individual teachers were doing, but over time, individual teachers wanted feedback. And actually, that's one of the reasons I got interested in working with students to write instructional memos to teachers. Because as we do data in a day, each person of the team would have a special classroom. And when they were in that classroom, as a part of their data in a day schedule, they would pay particular attention to what was going on generally, so they could write back to the teachers. Okay. But anyway, so data in a day begins with, usually, this is in my scenario, a big dinner. And the big dinner involves everybody who's going to be on a team and anybody who's just curious about it. And the teams come together during that dinner, they meet each other, and they look at a videotape, kind of like the Ms. Burton videotape, and they apply the 4 R's. And they practice in particular with one of those R's. So I'll tell you more about that afterwards. So that's how we set it up. And then what happens is they show up the next morning at about 7:15, but everybody's school schedule is different. This was a large comprehensive high school. And they come into a room and there's fresh fruit and water and that sort of thing. And they all have a schedule, and they all have a leader who's a student, and they take off. They go to their 6 classrooms following their, usually it's a 15-minute visit in each classroom. And then at the end of visiting, usually it's about 6 classrooms in a large school, they come back and we make sense of data. And the way we make sense of data, go with me on this, because I know it's not inherently interesting, but it's a good thing for just getting a sense of, well, we have all these observation pieces, how do we put it together? What we do then is everybody on each team that was the person that looked for relationships goes in one corner. Everybody on each team that was relevance goes in another. You're getting how this works. It was a jigsaw. And they would do wows and wonders. And I'm going to leave it at that because there are other steps, but that just gives you a sense of the process. So now I'm going to show you a video, and then I'm going to come back to you in your table groups, and I'm going to ask you to talk to each other about how you would describe data in a day if someone asked you about it. And this video is just going to be a very brief snapshot, just so you get a sense of it, okay?
There's a paradox that we have going on when we talk about education today. I find a paradox, and that is we talk very often and very deeply about how all students can learn. Sometimes we forget that all teachers can learn. Sometimes it's hard to bring that into our minds. And what tonight and tomorrow and the next day are about is teachers learning. So this is a classroom of one of the teachers who was being observed. All of our teachers got observed on this day. A team went through every single classroom. One of the things that was kind of interesting about that is that teachers were all given the option to not let people come through. The instruction was, if you don't want to be observed, just put a sticky note on your door. And you can make that decision right up until the minute, before someone's coming in. One of the kind of points we were talking about earlier is that an interesting thing was some teachers, we heard little things prior to the day about, oh, so-and-so isn't going to be observed, or so-and-so says they won't do it. And on the actual day, every single teacher opened their door.
It is a data in a day observation in our classes for us to improve the teaching methods or improving it some more.
I'm looking at meaning, or the other thing that Margery did is she updated the language to reflect the way in which Seattle Public Schools talks about it. So meaning crosswalks to rigor. So I'm looking at rigor in the different classrooms.
So one of the things that happened today that I believe was significant is that we started building an infrastructure that can really inform student learning and teachers' instruction related to student learning that can provide ongoing knowledge and scaffolding for change.
Okay, so we're looking at competence or results and looking at how teachers in their classrooms are encouraging the results that we want to see from Cleveland. So achievement, motivation, and making sure that kids can use this material in real life.
This group was focusing on inclusion in the classrooms, which means they were looking for evidence of a relationship of trust built between teachers and students and students in the classroom.
Because that teacher, she says she doesn't trust her students with lab work because they're not responsible. So I think that in that one, it's how can that teacher build trust, maybe?
Okay, so you had that visual opportunity to see what data in a day, or just a snippet. Now, before you go one step further and put it in your own words, I'm going to direct your attention to your data in a day packet. And in your packet, there's, it's actually a 2-pager. I called it a 1-pager. And this is the information that we send to families and community members and students when we're recruiting. And it's this page. It says 11 on the bottom, and it's entitled Data in a Day at Cleveland High School. And it starts out with, what is data in a day? Why is it important? How does it work? Please take a moment not only to read this, underline what speaks to you, and put a question mark by anything that you have that you'd want to go back to think more about. So what speaks to you, and what puzzles you or troubles you, with a question mark? Go for it. We'll take about, this isn't going to take more than 5 minutes. Be sure to look at the back of this page. So with the person that is joining you in this session, or the people who are joining you, please talk about what you would say to somebody if you were going to tell them what data in a day is in your own words. And don't use your cheat sheet now. Okay, go for it. Because of these teams, I need to. So let's redirect attention. What makes this process different than a regular walk-through or learning walk or instructional round process? Sally,
so
yeah.
The partnership that includes a parent, a student, an educator, and a community member, so it's a true partnership.
Thank you. Can anybody add to that?
In our school, and it was motivated, I'm not quite sure by whom or for what reason, but it seemed the purpose was that it was coming down from the central office. It was coming down from the supervisory union in a gotcha way. We're going to catch you, so then we can make suggestions about how you can improve. It had a different feel to it than this.
Thanks. Anyone else? So we've got that it's mixed teams, that it's coming from the teachers themselves are defining the process with students and community partners, that there's a chance that teachers will get used to this and be more authentic when visitors come to their classrooms. Anyone else?
It's not the teacher being observed, but the instructional practices being observed.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. I think that's really true, because you don't even have to put the teachers' names on this, right? And because people are working off of a rubric. Yeah, thanks.
How did you feel that it worked? Because there is kind of that element of you're hearing ways to improve, and people don't always apply it to themselves. You know, you hear that and you don't hear it for yourself.
The question was about what do people do as a consequence? Can we hold that to the end? Okay, because that's the question. All right, thanks a lot. Okay, so this is a way of taking a snapshot of teaching and learning in a single day. And it takes about 2.5 hours usually. And when people come back together, they do the wows and wonders in the 4 corners, like I said. But what you didn't see, except what I didn't say and what you saw on the tape, is that then students speak. Students share their insights, not only in terms of what they saw when they went into classrooms, but what the experience was like of being on teams. And then we also distribute a survey, so we have a sense of what teachers learned from the process and value and where to head next. And I believe I put a copy of that survey in your packet. And we'll look at that when we look at packet materials. Okay, so the next thing I'd like you to do is think about the way that this gets set up so that people feel This is really defined by the schools. And in order to do that, I'm going to ask you to engage in a bit of a simulation. So you're going to put yourself in the role of teachers now, not team members who are visiting. So pretend that you all work at a large high school, and a few people from the YATS team have come and said, you know, we learned about this approach to taking a snapshot of teaching and learning that would give us a sense of what it is we're really doing as a school at any moment on any given day. How do we really look? And how do we look according to the goals that we've set up for ourselves, the kinds of instructional priorities we have? Because some schools, like I said the example of Cleveland High School, they'd been working on project-based learning. So they wanted to tailor everything to that. Okay? Some schools are working with their assessment practices. And even if you're working, well, I don't want to get too into theory, but even if you're working with assessment, you should see something from each of the R's in every classroom related to it, right? Like, for instance, with relationships, you might have an item on your rubric be, how do people do peer assessments? That kind of thing. Okay. So anyway, but the point is here, you're teachers now, you're doing a carousel because people have introduced this process. And the first question is, what might our purposes be if we were to do data in a day? So you make that up. Make up anything that you can imagine teachers might say. It can be very different. You don't agree with each other as a group. It's a brainstorm, okay? And it moves quickly, so don't worry about consensus. And you're going to need a group recorder so that you can get all this down. So one group is going to start with that question. One group is going to start with this question. What kind of feedback would we want? And so the group that has this question would grapple with things like, well, would you want to have feedback written down? Would you want numbers, like, you know, a rating of 1 to 4, like Cleveland did at one point? So anything you can think of related to feedback. Another group is going to go over here, and your question is going to be, what would teams need to do to be fundamentally respectful? And then another group is going to go back here. Thank you, Audrey. And you're going to start with the logistics question. What would we need to take into consideration in terms of logistics? So this is what happens in a school that's setting up data in a day. So in order to do this, we've got 4 groups. We've got 4 posters. So great. You're group 1. Your group is going to pretend you're all one school now. You start over here. Remember, choose a recorder. Your group starts over there, please. And your group starts over there, please. All right, so go gather, get your energy, brainstorm. Let's see what you come up with.
Individual feedback versus collective feedback would be really important. Looking at it as a collective.
And I thought that point about the feedbacks on instructional practice, not the individual teacher, is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Okay.
It's a little like coming up with a common language and people understand what that language means. Because we can throw out that word, you know, instructional practice, but as long as everybody knows what that means.
That's a good point.
Okay, you got to start. Now please switch posters. So round robin. You're moving counterclockwise. Just to remind you where you underline what you agree with and modify or add to it.
Understanding of the subject, or like just getting the good grade?
Schedule. You want to underline schedule? Right.
Okay, what might our purposes be if we were to do to just give really good feedback, really?
To have
what's there already?
So find out we are reaching students. if we were teaching students making better connections, if double block schedule is working, improve our teaching methods, improving student achievement, and sharing instructional practice.
Finding out if, yeah, just like finding out if what we're learning, what is being taught is relevant.
Talk about what we're keeping students focused.
Or finding a way.
Finding a way to keep students focused.
Discovering trends.
Are you a lone player here?
I would like to underline these two if that's possible. Does anyone?
Yeah.
I agree. Improving student achievement.
I'd even underline the third one. Understanding what the school does well.
So now one more time, and you'll be at your original poster, and then I'll tell you what to do when you get there. I'm trying to teach the process of carousel so that you can adapt it to your own context if you find that this could come in handy. And then the second is I'm trying to do a bit of a simulation so you could see what people might actually say if they were going to set up data in a day. So here's the last part of the carousel piece. Now what you do in a team is you have to summarize. And that's not a really easy thing to do because you've got a lot of different ideas on paper. And what your task is just one sentence. So what different people have taught me over time is that it needs to be okay to highlight something that was particularly important to a group, you know, to all the groups, or that you think is particularly important. It's just a way to get us to zero in, once again, on the thinking that's gone into these. So go ahead. You got to do a summary. Do a summary as you want to do.
Yeah, it goes to everybody. Right. In this part, this is kind of the rollout of it.
Mm.
You know, the importance of rolling it out and communicating it to everybody.
Okay.
I think that timing and respecting the flow of the lesson and classroom setup are all kind of from the same area.
Creating operational norms, for giving feedback, for visiting, for all the logistics, then communicating it to her.
Okay, are you just about there? Who needs another minute? One more minute. So now each team has somebody at the poster, and to keep it going, would you please tell us who you are again, read the question, and then read the summary. And these would be posted on the wall ordinarily. One common thing that happens with this is people are tempted to say everything that's on there, and you really want to remind people to keep it really brief. Just say what the question was, what the summary is, because people have already seen almost everything that's on there. Great.
My name is Andrew Hudax, and I'm with the Agency of Education, and I was fortunate enough to sit with the Blue Mountain school team. And our question is, what might our purposes be if we were to do dyad? And the summary of the input was to receive feedback in order to increase classroom success of both students and teachers.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, next group.
Okay, so what we summarized, these guys right there, from Vermont, from New York, is that to be a member of this team, you have to be kind, you have to be sympathetic, you have to be unbiased towards other teachers. Like, you can't have a preference to one teacher or another. You have to be like in a neutral state, and you have to be respectful to what the teacher is teaching. Like, you can't just come up out of nowhere and just interrupt them. You have to be quiet, you have to be respectful, and you have to be in a neutral state. So, to put it in short term, don't do this when you wake up early in the morning and you're really tired.
Okay, thanks. And wait a minute. Would you tell everybody what the question was you were responding to?
Oh, what would students need to be? What would teams need to do to be fundamentally respectful of teachers?
Thanks so much. Okay, next.
Okay, so our question was what logistics would we need to consider? And ours was more of the planning out process of DIAD. We would need to consider the common language, which would then go into the operational norms, how it's going to work out and what time to do it. And then how to get it to everyone, so communication is key. And how would you express that to not just the students and the teachers, but also the parents, and get the community members involved?
Thank you very much. All right. And then finally, here is Jackson.
Okay, our question was, what kind of feedback would we want or want to provide? And the summary sentence we came up with was, we would want feedback that is respectful, informative, objective, and which can be acted upon. And that's my group over there.
All right, thank you very much. Here we go. Okay. So then, what you would do is you would have a fifth poster that would say, who might be willing to volunteer to be on a planning team? And that planning team would go back, look at these posters, and come up with a proposal for the school. So that's how you can get this idea going. Can you see, who in this room could imagine actually experimenting with this process? Well, that's pretty cool. Thank you. And who in this room has some questions now? Some of those questions might have some information in the packet that's helpful to you.
I asked, how did it seem to work that the comments were anonymous? And sometimes it's hard to hear, criticism or hear about how to change when it's not yourself. And you hear it kind of as other people.
Yeah. Thank you. So help me to know when I answer this if I'm answering the right question, because there seem to be two parts to it. And the first part has to do with just people being able to hear the feedback. And the second part, it sounded like it goes together. How can it be respectful feedback that really pushes people's thinking? Am I close or I missed it?
I was also just wondering, because it's anonymous,
yeah,
did it seem like the teachers were taking the stuff that was kind of meant for them or they needed to work on for themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in part that's how a lot of schools got to the point of saying, in addition to this, we want personal feedback from the teams, and then we came up with that approach to doing that. But basically, you can see some themes that run throughout a school. And let me just tell you something that I've learned about school change, and many of you may know, which is that it's never enough for a single teacher to be really great at what they do. An entire school needs to be pulling in the same direction, or it's not going to have the thrust that we want it to have. So sometimes just taking a big picture view of, sort of generally, how close do we seem to be coming to what we value instructionally, really helps a school go further than their own classroom. I think that a lot of teachers may think, wow, I'm really working hard and I'm making great gains and I'm seeing my students learning, but they don't really know if that's the case across the school. So this process answers that question. Did I answer your question? Okay, great. Here and then here, please.
I wonder how you form the teams so that you have a representative population of community members on the teams. I think for some of the teachers at my school, they feel very nervous about who might be on that team. Is it one of those community members that might be highly critical and vocal in the community? And
Yeah.
be the ones that would step forward and volunteer before others that might be take a different approach. And then I wonder, would it be appropriate for school members, school board members, to also be on that?
Thank you. So the first question is, what do you do about the composition of the teams? and especially what happens if some of the most critical members of the community are on the teams. And I'm going to tell you what, this is such a counterintuitive process because it's great for the people who are most critical. Because even if people have general ideas about what's wrong with the school or what's wrong with a teacher, when they're actually in a classroom watching the number of interactions that happen and they've got a rubric that's really pretty complicated to pull off, it's humbling. And that is consistently what happens. It transforms relationships. So I would say the important part is just at that dinner, that preparation dinner, if you do it that way, is to have really clear norms going in about keeping an open mind, because that's when people are most likely to be negative. But once the process starts, it's quite something. Okay? And then the second part was... Yes, school board members have been fabulous partners. And what can happen with school board members is then they spread the message. And they also, because many school board members, when they start out the school board meetings, report some of the great things they've been seeing, it's a good way to get the ideas out there. I know that there are school board members that can be really quite critical of schools and or maybe are focused on one particular issue, but this is another example of when they're on teams, they're tempered by the whole team. They're listening to really thoughtful people, especially the students. And it just raises everybody's expectations of what's possible in terms of student voice, in terms of what kind of depth we should be putting into the curriculum, and also in terms of what we need to do collectively to work together to support school change. So that long answer, but did I get there?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great.
More of a logistics question. We have faculties that range in size. Our faculty probably has average size, 45 members or so. And I don't know about the ratio. You're talking about, 10 teams with one teacher on each team. Like, you change the ratio based on the size of your school.
Yeah.
And what is that ratio? Because people don't want to go and see subs, and you really, I would think, want to have it be all-inclusive so that a teacher's on the team, not just on the team, so then they don't get an observation. Do you know what I'm saying?
These are fabulous questions because these are the things that come up. So in a smaller school, there are different ways that schools have problem solved that. So in some schools, they have fewer amounts of teams, and to maximize the likelihood that more teachers can participate, they do an A round in the morning and a B round in the afternoon. And another thing they do is the first time round, they mostly tap into the teachers that don't need substitutes and whose classrooms wouldn't be interesting places to visit because what they do isn't what you would visually see anyway. So you can draw out the counselors or the school psychologists and so forth just to get the process going. There's never been a student that refused the opportunity to do this. A lot of students kind of go into it confused. And this is the thing about anything that's new. Asking for commitment up front seems like a good thing to do, but that's not really how commitment happens. Just a willingness to be there is all you need. Once people see the promise in this, then they commit. So the students who are barely keeping their heads above water are great teammates. They know so much about instruction, and they know about it in powerful ways because they have to talk themselves into coming to school every day. And so I really encourage you to make sure you've got significant numbers of students that really haven't been able to have an easy go of it at school.
So you would invite lots of students to attend like the evening session to understand the process, and then your experience is those people all want to be involved once they understand it?
Yes. Or once they understand it, they want to be involved. Yep, that's right. So the challenge with some of the students who are ready to just basically exit is getting them to the evening dinner. Yeah, and there are lots of different ways you can think about that, including picking people up at their homes and so forth. Okay.
Okay. I was just curious, once the school has got the buy-in, is the expectation that all teachers will engage in this process?
Thank you. What we've done the first time that the teams go around and visit is we've said to people, if you, at the last minute, get real nervous about having a team come, put a sticky note on your door. And what's been really interesting about just offering that choice, I think there's only been one time ever that a teacher did that. So I think you'd be surprised, because really, you know, the schools that I've worked in schools that really are moving and shaking, but I've worked at schools that know they need to fundamentally shift what they're doing. These are the schools that have had 4 principals, that have high dropout rates and so forth. In fact, they're eager to prove that they're very interested in learning. It's just got to be under the right conditions. In the schools I've worked with, the teachers have said, just use your own sensibilities. When you come into the classroom, feel free to get close to a student, introduce yourself and say, you know, may I take a moment to talk to you? And the 3 questions that they typically ask is, and you've got your own questions, I'm sure, but what are you learning? That tells you if students are aware of the goals, right? Why are you learning it? Relevance. And is it interesting? Sometimes everybody looks like they're on task, but being on task is very different than being fully engaged and challenged, right? So yes, so that's it, thank you. Yeah.
We have a very small school.
Yeah.
And I feel like a challenge we'll have is just being objective doing this. And I was just wondering if you've had any experience with small schools.
I have. There are a couple things I say about that, which is at the very beginning, we practice something called low inference note-taking. And all that is we divide a piece of paper in half, and on one side, we practice everything that you can tell about what's happening because you can actually see it. There's visible evidence. And like, for instance, 24 people were focused on the lesson. Looks like they're engaged. That would be good. On the other side is a room, though, for your opinions or the thoughts you're having, just so you don't lose those. Those are important. It's just you want to keep those separate. So you might have a question. Is this really challenging to the range of learners? That might be going on through your mind. But that's not what you're going to offer in the way of feedback, not for this. Okay? So it's just to honor the fact that you are going to have those thoughts. You know, being subjective. Some people say there is no such thing really as pure objectivity, because even what you decide to focus on can be subjective. But the thing is, you want to hold on to your feelings and your thoughts. There's a place for that and a way to communicate those later. Do you know the protocol of head, heart, hand? Head is something I'm thinking. Heart is something I'm feeling. Hand is something I want to do. Choose a head or a heart or a hand. And let that be an exit pass that you hand to me as you go about transitioning to lunch, so that I get a sense of something you might have been thinking about, something you're feeling now, something you know you want to do. And let me just say, thank you very much for being here. I hope this was informative. Stay in touch.